Greetings, everyone. My name is Sterling Gillum, and I'm honored to be the director of your National Naval Aviation Museum, and we are thrilled to host MOOCHAPALOOZA South here at your National Naval Aviation Museum. Been the director here for 10 years, and we are thrilled to host 600,000 patrons plus a year. We represent the third largest aviation museum in the world. And we're very, very proud to be here in the cradle of naval aviation. We look forward to a good event for MOOCHAPALOOZA South.
So Sterls, talk to us about this amazing Nimitz flight deck recreation you have here.
Well, a few years ago, we realized we needed a way to tell an enduring story about naval aviation. As you know, naval aviation started in 1911, so we've got 114 years going strong, and we wanted to be able to tell a modern day story. So in 2019, we repurposed 8,500 square feet of the flooring in the entrance to the museum to a 1/5 scale replica of the USS Nimitz flight deck. Now, we all know Nimitz is the oldest aircraft carrier in the Navy, but the last in that class, USS George Herbert Walker Bush, was only commissioned in 2009. So we have another 35 years of ability to tell a first-person, modern-day story about what's going on these Nimitz class carriers. USS Harry S. Truman being case in point. They're out doing great work in the Eastern Mediterranean and Red Sea at the moment.
Regular viewers remember that Hozer and I were aboard Truman, a Nimitz class carrier, back in April. You can see behind Sterls there's a Hornet coming aboard in accordance with good Case 1 discipline every 55 seconds.
Absolutely.
We're standing in the landing area, so you guys, you and Hozer as LSOs would have waved that airplane off in real life, but this is an amazing sort of greeting to the museum here with this 1/5 scale flight deck of the USS Nimitz.
And one of the things we wanted to do is have authenticity. The airplanes that you see coming aboard are from Air Wing 17, which is currently assigned on Nimitz, so it's a good story. And a lot of folks haven't had the opportunity that you and I have had to be on an aircraft carrier, so this allows us to tell the patron from Des Moines what it's like to be aboard a real live USS aircraft carrier.
And you feel it because you have the 5MC going on, you got the airplanes coming aboard. This is really a great job you guys have done to recreate that. Fantastic.
Mooch, to help tell this story about the Nimitz flight deck and aircraft carriers in general, right off the Nimitz flight deck that we were just on, we have a model of the USS George Herbert Walker Bush, which is a lasting class, CVN 77 of the 10 Nimitz class that we built. And you notice in the foreground, we actually have a model of the USS Langley, which CV1, our first dedicated aircraft carrier. Interestingly, both of these models are to scale, so you can see how much larger USS George Herbert Walker Bush is compared to the Langley, which was commissioned in 1922. This allows our patrons who may not have had an opportunity to be aboard an aircraft carrier to get some scale, because the model is really, really nice, and we're very appreciative to Newport News Shipbuilding for donating that model.
Excellent. So Sterls, I did an episode when the movie Devotion came out. We were on the red carpet talking to the director. Thomas Hudner's son was there, so my regular viewers are familiar with this event. But talk to us about this display and how it came to be.
Yeah, you bet. You know, as you know, Korea is often referred to as a forgotten war, and to a degree in this museum, it was kind of the forgotten exhibit. Right as the movie was wrapping up, the production team, Black Label Media, reached out to us and said, hey, we're breaking down the set, and we have the props we use, specifically this F-4U Corsair that you see behind me. Would you be able to do something with it at the museum? We said, absolutely. So they delivered it here, and we ended up building this diorama here, creating the final moments of that epic story of Thomas Hudner and Jesse Brown to allow us to tell a pretty remarkable story that naval aviation is centrally involved in.
Well, this gives you an example of the scale. How big was a Corsair? You can see the crumpled nose in the snow. There's Hudner trying to pull Jesse Brown out. Ultimately, he was unsuccessful, as people who are familiar with that story know. But this is a fantastic example of preserving history. The museum now is part of the official curriculum for flight students who are going through the first phase before they start going to primary.
Pensacola is the cradle of naval aviation, and just like me and you, every naval aviator starts their Navy career here, whether they graduated from Annapolis, ROTC, or OCS. You and I started out with aviation pre-flight indoctrination. It's now called NIFE, Naval Introductory Flight Evaluation. Engines, aerodynamics, metro, navigation. Embedded in that is a 3-hour history course, which we now teach here at the museum. And we use the artifacts and archives we have here at the National Naval Aviation Museum to teach a little bit about the culture that these young men and women are joining. For example, we have Neil Armstrong's training jacket, and we'll point out to some unsuspecting 2024 graduate of the United States Naval Academy that the first person to walk on the moon routinely got below averages in flight school. Not that Armstrong's a bad pilot, but naval aviation is this relentless pursuit of perfection.
Yeah, that's fantastic and great context for flight students. I feel negligent when I was going through in terms of my knowledge of naval aviation history. It's only when I was teaching at the Naval Academy that I started to appreciate this business we were part of. So it's great that you guys are taking the initiative to do this up front.
Well, we're excited about it. We're a Navy museum. It's funded in large part by Navy tax dollars coming out of the Navy budget, so we felt that we could enhance warfighting. Premise being, a young aviator, guy or gal that's had this education will be a better flight student and a better warrior in the long run because they understand the culture of this rich 114-year history.
Fantastic. So this is an incredible display. Reminder to everybody that Thomas Hudner was bestowed the Medal of Honor for this action. So a great moment in naval aviation history. So Hozer, here we have a display talking about the humble beginnings of carrier aviation. Talk to us about what we're seeing here.
Yes, they certainly were humble. In 1910, here's a model of USS Birmingham, and it is at anchor at Willoughby Spit, very familiar to us, near Norfolk Naval Base. But the crew had built a wooden platform on the bow, and they hired a guy named Eugene Ely to take off in one of these newfangled aeroplanes. And he was able to do that, and there's a very famous picture that we've seen. He barely gets airborne and gets out above the waves and lands back ashore. It was about 2 to 3 months later, in January of 1911, this is a model of USS Pennsylvania. It was at anchor in San Francisco Bay, and the crew had built this wooden platform on the back of the ship. And Eugene Ely, who was a daredevil, because who else would land an airplane on a ship? He had modified his airplane to have grappling hooks on the bottom of it to catch these mooring lines, these manila mooring lines that were held in place by sandbags. So he takes off, he lands aboard the ship. You can see how the sandbags are kind of being pulled as he's able to land. Mrs. Ely was aboard, so the captain took Eugene and Mrs. Ely into the wardroom, served them lunch. Meanwhile, he ordered the airplane to be spotted, I think the first use of the term spot, to turn around, and Eugene Ely was able to take off, and he barely made it. He barely made it over the waves, but he was able to land back ashore in San Francisco. This news was cabled to Washington, and on May 8th, 1911, the Navy signed a contract with Glenn Curtiss for the first naval aircraft.
So, Hozer, we've talked to the viewers about your book, The Silver Waterfall, which is a fictionalized history of the Battle of Midway. We did an episode about the Battle of Midway that you hosted. So right here, we have a Dauntless dive bomber. So talk to us about this display.
Yes, the SBD, which stands for Scout Bomber Douglas, Dauntless dive bomber, in early 1942 was probably the best dive bomber in the world. What we have here is we have a pilot and a radioman gunner, so again a sailor who operates the radio, full-time job, and of course is on that Twin 30 back there. The airplane is designed to roll into a 90-degree vertical dive. It is held in place by these dive brakes. So the dive brakes open up, the pilot will push over in 0G, and in some cases I've read that they kind of knuckled over, but 90 degrees. And they're held in place at 240 knots by these dive brakes. The pilot looks through his scope there, just a little tube with crosshairs, and there on the surface is a moving ship, and he is taking lead on that ship as it's twisting and turning through the water. He is armed with this bomb here on the center line. That's a 500-pound bomb there, although the airplane is capable of carrying a 1,000-pound weapon. And on the wingtips, or on the wings here, are incendiary weapons that sometimes they carried. The gunner would turn his seat around so he's facing forward, and he's calling out altitudes. 5,000, 4,000, and then below 4,000, you say 39, 38, 37, all the way down to 2,000 feet, where the pilot would then release this weapon. Now, the airplane is now in a 70-degree dive with the aerodynamic forces over the wing when the weapon comes off. Look at this apparatus here attached to the bomb. When you drop a bomb in a vertical dive, it's going to go through this prop arc, and that's really bad. So what the designers did is they built this thing called a yoke or a crutch, which flings the weapon clear. So as soon as the bomb comes off, and we know this feeling, it's a good feeling when you feel that thing come off, the pilot with both hands unaided, they didn't have G-suits in those days, we are pulling out right above the waves, 7, 8 Gs I've read, and just to get clear, the gunner has to kind of clear his head, turn himself around, get on the gun, and start defending himself. Now, on the morning of June 4th, 1942, 18 Dauntlesses flown by Marines from Midway Atoll attacked the Japanese fleet. Only 9 of them returned. Let's come around here and take a look.
Okay.
Okay, as we come back here, we're going to look at these rivet patches. Here's another one. Here's another one over here. There's one up there. These rivet patches were caused by AAA bullet holes. This is one of the 9 airplanes that returned. It's flown by First Lieutenant Daniel Iverson with Private Wallace Reed in the back. Private Reed was wounded in the foot by one of these. You know, which one? And I don't know the answer to that, but one of them. Iverson brought this airplane back, and it was heavily damaged, but the maintenance chiefs were able to make it flyable again. But meanwhile, Dauntlesses just like this one from the 3 American carriers, Hornet, Yorktown, and Enterprise, came upon the Japanese. They rolled in on them from high altitude. It was a surprise. They put 3 carriers out of action that morning, 1 later on in the afternoon. It changed the course of the Pacific War. Now, getting back to this airplane, again, it was made flyable with these patches. It found its way to Glenview, Illinois, and it was used in training where we had the training carriers Sable and Wolverine. So one day in 1943 or 44, an ensign flight student is flying this airplane, has trouble, ditches it in Lake Michigan. The ensign survives, and the airplane sinks in the bottom of Lake Michigan, where it sat for 50 years. It was brought to the surface, and when they brought it to the surface, they looked at this bureau number right here, and you can see that it's on the tail here, 2106, and this is this fully restored airplane. They left that the way that they found it. So they found the logbook for 2106. They said, "Where's 2106 been?" And they looked at it and said, "Wow, this airplane was at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. It was aboard Lexington early in the war, some of the Central Pacific raids where the pilot received a Navy Cross for his actions. Then it was transferred to the Marine Corps, and on June 4th, 1942, participated in the Battle of Midway. It is the only surviving aircraft from that battle, arguably the most important airplane here. And like all the airplanes at the National Naval Aviation Museum, you can touch it. And so guests do, and they don't abuse that privilege. But it's nice to be able to see this artifact. This was there, flown by 2 human beings, and we know their story.
So, Hozer, we're here at the Cabot flight deck where we're actually going to have the reception for MOOCHAPALOOZA, but pretty amazing scoreboard here. Tell us about what we're seeing here.
An incredible story about the scoreboard and this ship. USS Cabot was a light carrier in World War II, and we had many of them. And Cabot, obviously, you look at the scoreboard, all the Japanese ships and airplanes, that this one light carrier and its air group accounted for. And so when you think about all the light carriers and all the heavy carriers and the battleships and the submarines and cruisers, everything that we had, you just look at this, the industrial scale carnage, the war of attrition in World War II, it really comes to light. Now, at the end of World War II, Cabot was decommissioned, as most of our fleet was. It found its way to Spain, and it served in the Spanish Navy until 1970 as a carrier. When Cabot was at the end of her life in 1970, the Spanish were obviously going to scrap it, but the Navy said, you know what, we want this back. We want the tower, the island superstructure from Cabot back, because there was a vision for this museum. Now, meanwhile, the sailors of Cabot, when the ship was decommissioned, they had taken butcher block paper and they had reproduced this scoreboard on butcher block paper that survived for 44 years until 1989, when this piece of the museum was built and this island from Cabot was installed here. Those elderly men who probably look like us now, they were able to come here with paint brushes, and they painstakingly reproduced the scoreboard on this island here. So this is a another terrific human story here that of one kind of just one ship among many, and what this one ship did.
So Hozer, we're here in what's known as Hangar Bay 1 part of the museum, and there's a A1 display here that has a pretty amazing backstory. Talk to us about this.
Yes, the airspace over North Vietnam in the 1960s, some of the most dangerous airspace in military history. And it was A1s like this that cut their teeth in the Korean War that were still flying in that conflict. But here is a display of an A1 windscreen here that took a AAA round. You can see how it shatters there. Imagine you're flying into that cone of fire. You have a target, you're getting shot at by that target, and coming back to the ship with that. But a guy that I met years ago, name is Dale Pellet. He was a pilot in VA-25, and he came back from a hop over the beach aboard Coral Sea, and shuts down, and so his prop spins, and it comes to an end, and he saw this in front of him, his prop blade right here, this right in front of him, and he saw that AAA hole in the middle of the blade. He didn't know he'd been hit in the prop like that. And what a tough airplane to come back in this way. But there's another terrific story about VA-25 aboard Coral Sea. During the Tet Offensive in early 1968 at a place called Lang Bay, an Army contingent was being overrun by North Vietnamese regulars, including tanks. So the Army guys are fighting for their lives. They call for help with an Air Force FAC that contacts some A1s from Coral Sea and that were fully armed. So he was able to contact a guy that we know, Lieutenant Commander Zip Rousa. And so Zip and his wingman followed this A1 down through the goo, and I think the weather is like 301, so they're underneath now. And the 01 FAC leads them to these Army guys. The A1 start strafing, they're dropping their bombs. I mean, they're so close to the ground, their bombs don't even have time to arm, but they're able to drive the North Vietnamese back bit by bit. Throughout the day, A1s from Coral Sea were helping these guys. At the end of the day, they went back to the Coral Sea, and the CAG found out about it, and he was mad at him. He's saying, guys, you're risking your lives. I mean, the Coral Sea had an awful, awful cruise in 1967, 68. They're about ready to go home. So, he kind of yells at Zip and the other guys in VA-25, don't do that again. Meanwhile, the Army guys are receiving 1 Medal of Honor, multiple Silver Stars. I mean, this was a major action in Army history in the Vietnam War at Lang Bay. They call it the Night of the Silver Stars. And 40 years later, these Army guys say, I wonder whatever happened to those Navy guys that saved our lives. So through the magic of the internet, they are able to track them down. I was here at the Centennial of Naval Aviation Gala in 2011. We had one of the Army colonels, and he was a first lieutenant at Lang Bay. He had been a retired colonel and gone through a distinguished career. Zip Rousa was in the audience. The colonel's wife came up on stage and said, I have been married to this man for 40 years. We have children. We have had a great life, and I owe it all to that man. And she pointed to Zip. And just tears and everyone standing ovation, and Zip went up there, big hugs. Zip should have received a Navy Cross for what he did, and he didn't, humbly, and we know that he would just serve doing his job. What a great moment.
So Hozer, F-18 Hornet, airplane near and dear to your heart. This particular one commemorates a shoot down during Desert Storm. We've had one of the pilots on the channel a long time ago, Mongo, from Hook, a few years ago, telling his story first person. But remind the audience of what this airplane commemorates.
Yes, it was the second day of Operation Desert Storm, and this Hornet flying from VFA 81 aboard USS Saratoga. It was Lieutenant Commander Mark Fox and his wingman Lieutenant Nick Mongillo were part of a large strike package. They're going into central Iraq daytime. They encounter some bandits ahead of them, and they're able to go from their air-to-ground radar display as they're preparing to drop their weapons quickly back into air-to-air. They each locked an aircraft. They were able to shoot forward quarter sidewinders, and here's a sidewinder right here. It's a heat-seeking missile, and able to knock them down in a forward quarter engagement. They went right back to air to ground and were able to deliver their ordnance. So this on this mission, the multi-mission strike fighter aspect of the FA-18, what it was designed for, was validated in combat.
And you have a kill marking on the airplane here of a MiG-21, and in fact, right next to us here is a MiG-21, so you really get a feel for the scale of the two airplanes. First full day of Desert Storm. The night prior, because the war started the evening prior, we lost Spike, So talk to us, remind the audience about that, how that went down.
Scott Spiker, the former squadron mate, friend to all, he was a department head in VFA 81, and he lost his life on a similar night large strike package, multi-plane strike into central Iraq, and he was shot down, but not to say that life goes on, but combat must continue. So while the pilots aboard Saratoga are thinking about Spike and, okay, how do we get him back? Meanwhile, this strike had to go, and it did.
And Mongo talks about that he asked the previous strike what happened to Spike, and they were like, well, we don't know. Just kind of slow rolled it. Focus on your mission, go and do it. So like you said, leadership has to make the hard calls and make sure that everybody's focused in the face of, this combat action.
Yes, it's a terrific display. The museum does a great job telling these human stories.
All right, so we saved the best for last. Obviously, we've talked about the F-14 a bunch in the history of the channel here. So here we have a VF-213 Black Lion airplane from the last combat deployment of the F-14. It has some of the features that we've talked about in passing, but I wanted to point them out here that we have this airplane right here in Hangar Bay 1. So first, this is an F-14D. So the way you can tell this right up front is because it has the television camera system, but it also has the infrared search and track. The other thing I want to point out, so Kara, if you follow me here, so this is the lantern pod. This is what made the F-14 into a precision strike bomber in the end game. So we've talked about this many times. When Snort Snodgrass was fighter wing, he and Larry Slade and some others worked with the Wright Defense Contractors to put an Air Force system, half of it, onto the F-14, the targeting pod. The regular landing system also has a navigation pod, but this is just the targeting pod. In the back seat, I went from the fishbowl, the TID, to a digital display that was a 10-inch high-res fantastic thing, and the navigation, because of the lantern pod, became a lot better than just the F-14's own navigation system by itself. So this, as you can see, the lantern pod would fit on, in this case, it's on Station 8, 8B, and it was a very cool system. Here's what a GBU looked like. It's just a Mark 80 series bomb with a fin kit, front and back. This is what made it able to be steered, and it picked up the laser energy. And so this is what was used heavily, and this squadron was one of the first to be on the scene post 9/11 in Afghanistan primarily. So that's captured here. You can see just how big the F-14 is, like we did in the episode where I did the walk around with the F-14 on the Naval Academy grounds. But this is really a fantastic display. So I was not a Westpac sailor. I was an East Coast guy the whole time I was in the Navy. But we have with us, in fact, a Westpac sailor, one of our good friends and a patron of the channel, Sparky Sparks. So Sparky, tell us a little bit about your naval aviation background. It's sort of an unorthodox career path.
I clearly had a career path I didn't set out on, I can tell you that. I started out as an NFO flying EA-6B Prowlers. Not my first choice, but almost everybody doesn't get their first choice.
Yeah, there are only so many Rio slots to go around, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I hear you, yeah. And so eventually, after 3 years, 2 deployments on USS Kitty Hawk to Westpac, I was selected to go through the pilot training pipeline again. So I had so much fun with flight training, I went through twice. And everybody that's been through one version of it already knows the story of that. So at the completion of becoming a naval aviator, the Navy, I was the 3rd retread to go back and fly Prowlers, and the first 2 retreads crashed. The Secretary of the Navy was John Lehman, a very charismatic leader. I met him actually several times, and he said there will never be another retread fly a Prowler as long as I'm Secretary of the Navy. I get a phone call from the XO of our squadron here, and he says, you can fly anything in the Navy you want. I always wanted to be an A6 bombardier navigator, so I ended up going back and becoming an A6 pilot. I ended up with 1,300 hours in the A6 Intruder, which is actually the high time of all the different seats that I sat in.
As you mentioned, you had some combat time in Desert Storm.
Right. I flew in the A6B Prowler in Desert Storm and was fresh out of the A6. I'd made basically 4 back-to-back deployments. So I had a lot of sea time. I knew a lot of the guys in here. And when you would come in here, this is in Cubi Point, which are two naval bases, if you will, conjoined. You could drive from one to the other and never realize it. But Subic Bay was the aviation side Cubi Point was the aviation side of the airfield, and so this was where the aviators came to join and have a beer. So there was a tradition as you came through that you would put a plaque up commemorating your visit to the Westpac. And so each of these represent typically a squadron or a specific unit, and they so you started out with just a plain plaque, as you see around here, just single, one-dimensional, if you will, and then the trophy wars or the plaque wars started, and you started getting three-dimensional plaques and all sorts of different crazy ideas. And so every time you came back, there was always something new in here to look at. And you also commemorated your losses as well. And so being here in the Cubi bar was like, I don't know, you're a golfer, and so there's hollowed ground in golf. This is hollowed ground in naval aviation.
So let's back up a little bit. So what we're sitting in is at the National Museum of Naval Aviation.
Correct.
Is a perfect recreation
Correct.
of the Cubi Point O Club.
Right.
So how did this come to be?
Well, as history has proven, we eventually left the Philippines in 1991. Mount Pinatubo erupted. In 1991, the U.S. government was in the process of negotiating a new lease, if you will, another 10-year lease for multiple billions of dollars. And the Philippine government and the U.S. government were having their arguments, and Pinatubo erupted, burying the field under 3 feet of ash. So they said, it's not economically feasible to continue, so we're just going to pack up and leave. The commanding officer of Cubi Point was a guy by the name of Bruce Wood, and I can show you his name over here. And he was the CEO of the base, and he said, we have to save this. And so he came in, and I'm sure there were many, many people with him, but apparently it was his idea. And they basically boxed up all of this stuff, and somebody took dimensions, and these tables are from Cubi Point. These are not reproductions. These are the real thing. And so they boxed all this up and was brought back via sea container, I believe, or I ran into a gent today. He said he was bringing some back on a C9. But they were in storage for about 2 years in a sea container out in the sun. And so when they opened it up, mold, bugs, everything you can imagine. So there was an extensive effort to refurbish these plaques and then put them on display. In the meantime, they also took all of the bars, well, like I said, the table. There's a shuffleboard table over the side there that you could play we used to be able to play shuffleboard on. It's closed up now. But all of the things, the bar and all that is dimensionally correct. And there's a cappuccino machine over there. It doesn't work. I actually called and asked about it, and they said, no, it doesn't work anymore. But at closing time, typically 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, you would get you'd get your cappuccino for the road, or actually we didn't get cappuccino. We got the Irish coffee. A little coffee, a lot of whiskey. So that was the way that worked. But I mean, you would, and right around the corner, not depicted in this area, was an Audubon line. Because you couldn't call the United States, well, you could if you had an infinite amount of money, but you called the detailer from here. And so there would literally be a line, 8, 9 guys here, lieutenant detailer. He comes in to the Pentagon or wherever it is at the Crystal City, and so he's on the phone in D.C. at 2 o'clock in the morning talking to semi-inebriated guys about their next set of orders. And you'd see guys coming around the corner just smiling and smiling, super happy. I got TPS, or I got whatever I wanted, whatever it was I wanted. And then you'd hear the guys, you'd hear like the phone slam down or whatever, and he goes, I'm leaving the Navy. I'm out of here. They want me to go to VT-10 and be an instructor, and I'm not doing that, one of those things. So there was a real high and low, and you could sit here and watch the guys come around the corner and look at the smile on their face or the not so happy face on their. There are so many memories in here, and when I walk through here, like I said, sometimes I get choked up just looking at these things. You look at some of the old squadrons that you were in, or you look and you see names of guys who were JGs that I ended up being COs of squadrons or on carriers.
To that point, there's Heater's name on a VF-21
right
plaque
yep.
when he was a CO. So just the atmosphere is just like you said, just so many stories, so many highs and lows.
Right.
As I said at the outset, I wasn't a Westpac guy. So there was something about Cubi Point that was unique to doing a West Coast deployment. It was a place where you would stop. The
Right,
carrier would be
right.
do some maintenance there.
Right.
They had a capability for repairs, and it wasn't just hanging out at the Oak Club, but there was a
Right.
utility to it that is lost now. We don't really have that anymore.
Exactly. Forward deployed like that, it was not uncommon for a carrier to pull in for a month. And so we would fly the airplanes off of the ship, and there was the airfield, literally, if you were in the real place, you'd look down a hillside, and you could see the runway, and you see flight operations going on there. And the first time you fly into Cubi Point off of the ship, so you spend roughly a month and a half coming across from the West Coast. You're out off the coast here, and unbeknownst to the new guys, all the nuggets, all the guys who've never been in the PI, Philippines, they would typically load all those guys up, and they would be the first ones off of the ship. And so you would land, and I remember I was a ECMO at the time, getting out of a prowler, all sweaty, nasty, all your flight gear's hanging off of it. And there, over in the corner, one of the advanced det had coolers full of San Miguel beer, and the waitresses from up here, all the prettiest girls you've ever seen, all in mini skirts and the spike heels and that sort of thing, all made up perfect, just absolutely. And they walk out to you, and they'd hand you a beer, and they'd give you a kiss on the cheek with lots of lipstick, so you had a red lips on yours, and they go, "Welcome to PI." And that's the way you came to the Philippines the first time.
And because you spent such an extended period of time here, including the O Club,
Right.
It was just sort of baked into your DNA
Right.
as a West Coast
Right,
sailor,
right.
in a way that again, it's foreign to me as an East
Right,
Coast guy. I mean,
right.
we had special places, and
Right,
obviously
right.
the back bar at the Oceano Club has similar sorts of memories, but
Right.
not to this degree.
Right.
So we have some dice here, because one
Right.
of the things that you used to do there was do a roll 'em.
Roll for dice,
so let's
roll for
go
drinks.
through
Okay.
the basics of how this goes.
I have to acknowledge that my friend John Shattuck loaned this to me. And this is a no kidding, no shit, from the QBO Club. He bought this 40 years ago,
Real
whatever.
Corinthian leather,
Authentic,
hand-stitched.
hand-stitched,
Yep,
yeah.
okay.
And so dice are typically, you could play ship, captain, crew. Are you familiar with the game?
You're going to have to remind me, because
Okay.
it's been a while since I...
Well, first rules.
Let's do a primer. Let's do a basic.
First rule
Pretend
is
like I don't know anything.
Right. Okay. So the first rule is any dice that go on the floor, it's serious party foul. That's a round.
You buy
Okay,
a round.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you roll 6 like that, you buy the table. You buy a round. But if you roll all aces, and if you go to and I think down at Mustin Beach they still have the aces honor roll, you buy the whole facility. And so the unwritten rule is, if the unlikely event that you would roll 5 aces, one of them will reach over and knock it on the floor. So you get it degraded. So all you have to do is buy the
The guys around
buy the
table.
Okay,
Yeah.
so ship, captain, crew, you get 3 rolls.
So how many guys would play at once? Remind me.
As many.
As many as you want.
as
So you're
many
just
as you
passing the
want.
cup around.
Right.
Okay.
So, and literally you go like, are you ready? I'm sorry. And so you go, are you in or out or whatever? And realizing that, we had a finite amount of finances. So
Yeah.
there was a bit of risk involved here. And I think there's somebody around here that had to borrow money from somebody because they lost a roll one time.
Yeah,
Is that
maybe.
true?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how I got my calls.
Yeah. So the ship, captain, crew is, you got a ship, you got a captain, and you've got a crew. So number 4 rolls up here. Okay. So you have 3 rolls. You have to make a 6, 5, 4 out of those. So when you roll a die, you just leave it there. So, but you have to get a 6, then a 5, and then a 4. And then you set your point, which are the two remaining dice. You get 3 rolls.
Okay. Go
So
ahead.
so then the guy with the lowest number, like, it's possible that you would not get a ship, captain, crew in your 3 rolls. So then it's like a race to the bottom to figure out who has the suckiest roll. Okay?
Okay.
So remember, the first rule is that, right? Okay, so I got a ship, so a 6, a 5, and okay, so I'm going to pick them up. I got 2 more rolls. By the way, are you buying for everybody when this is over?
Yeah, we'll see how the rolls go.
Oh, okay, yeah,
What, you're
right.
Bending the rules here?
No, I'm just, okay, nothing. I need a 4. Still need a 4. Okay. Nothing. Okay, ship captain, that's all I got.
Okay.
To
So
you.
now it's to me.
Right?
Right?
Yep.
Also, if they stack, that's a no.
You're right,
no
doesn't
roll,
count.
right?
Yeah, doesn't count.
Right?
Yeah. And leaners don't count either.
Leaners don't count.
No,
Right.
no. Stacked or leaners don't count.
Okay, so I've got ship, captain, crew. I
There you
win.
go.
So
You win
easy
already.
button.
All right.
Right? That's how that would go.
Piece of cake.
Yeah.
Get on my credit card. Oh, we
All
didn't
right.
have credit cards in the old days, right?
Oh, I don't.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it
you
was
don't
only
remember.
Cash only was.
Cash only, pretty much, yeah. Or as a good naval aviator, you had a big watch and you're always trying to cash a check, right?
Exactly.
That was the tradition. So,
All right. Well, good stuff, Sparky. Thank
Yeah,
you for
awesome.
the trip down memory lane,
Yeah.
Westpac style.
Yeah.
And again, if you're here at the Naval Aviation Museum, you got to stop by the Cubi Bar to sort of take all this in. It's pretty amazing stuff.
it is a restaurant, so they serve till 2 o'clock. We're going to have San Miguel and Cubi dogs.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get to it. All right, that'll do it for MOOCHAPALOOZA South 2025. I'd like to thank all of my patrons who made the trip down here, everybody who attended the reception, and I'd especially like to thank Hozer and Sparky for helping us with the details of the various displays they have here. If you're in the area, you have got to check this place out. I would especially like to thank Sterling Gillum and all the folks on the staff of the National Naval Aviation Museum for all their help here. And don't forget, if you're here, you've got to check out the Cubi Bar and get yourself a San Miguel and a Cubi dog. All right. If you're not a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.